absurd policies with regard to Palestine, where he has broken the pretension of neutrality towards the Palestine issue. There was a pretension previously to neutrality towards the issue, but that pretension has gone away. And of course, we've observed the carrot dangling of the USA with regard to the two-state solution, and leadership, especially within the Middle East, Arab leadership has been following that carrot dangling in order to accept a two-state solution. And so many people have mentioned the two-state solution as the only actual solution to resolve the conflict. But the two-state solution in itself, while that has been proposed as a solution for the conflict, the post-1967, after the taking of Jerusalem by Israeli forces, the USA has increased its donors, so the number of donors that donate towards the illegal occupation has increased in terms of what illegal settlers entrenching themselves within Palestinian lands. So this is not only the illegal occupation in terms of the entire entity known as Israel is illegal for us. The entire entity within Palestine. They can have the state of Israel in Europe or America, but being on Palestine, it is illegal for us. The entire thing is an illegal occupation. But they have entrenched themselves not only in what is known in international legal terms as Israel post 1948, when the state of Israel was declared by the UN May 1948 formally as a state, but then they have an expanded state which is from the 1967 war with Egypt and Syria and other nations. That post 1967 borders are deemed illegal internationally. So they've entrenched themselves within the post 1967 Israel as well, which is it includes the West Bank and Gaza, but other parts of what today is known as Israel. So America increased its donors, and that's not even government aid. That's not even in reference to the aid that the United States as a government sends to Israel. This is private donors, what they have been sending. One of those things is aid to entrench settlers within Palestine, illegal aid, illegal in American law, but illegal according to international law. So that carrot dangling, why I refer to the so-called two-state solution as actual carrot dangling, is because Muslims have been saying pre-1967 borders, we need to go back to the pre-1967 borders, and we need a two-state solution. Even Imran Khan advocated for this. So someone who is trusted by a large population of the Pakistani population, even he advocated for a two-state solution pre-1967 borders. Erdogan, who is trusted by so many Muslims, even he proposed for a pre-1967 borders, two-state solution. That is the political talk. That is how politicians, they will state or advocate the case for Palestine. Pre-1967 borders, that is because they are within the framework of what is known as the United Nations. Within that framework, you must accept United Nations resolutions. Whenever the United Nations gives a resolution, you have to accept the resolution of the United Nations. Now, how do we frame the issue in terms of Islam? Not in terms of politics, not in terms of how the United Nations resolutions are ineffectual, because whenever you look at the resolutions in the 1970s, there are many resolutions. What were those resolutions? That Israel must withdraw from the land it took in the 1967 war. That resolution was passed by the United Nations. Has Israel acted upon that? The answer is no. Has America enforced the state of Israel to act upon that? The answer is no. What does that entail for us as Muslims, not as politicians, as Muslims? It entails that the resolutions of the United Nations are ineffectual. They have no actual effect on the ground. When the United Nations gives a resolution, it does not entail any ramifications, any change, any noticeable change on the ground. Secondly, as Muslims, we note the double-speak of the government. There is double-speak. What is that double-speak? That Israel has a right to defend itself. But if you place the boot on the other foot, and you said Palestine has a right to defend itself, that dialectic is not being utilized in the media or by politicians. So, as Muslims, we must reframe the entire issue through our methodology, which is that of the Quran and the Sunnah. From Al-Quran al-Kareem and the Sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam. How do we view the current occupation? How do we view the resistance? How should Muslims approach the current situation? But before doing that, I would want to mention the virtues of Al-Aqsa al-Sharif and the history of Al-Aqsa al-Sharif, and also inform people with regard to what? With regard to some of the myth that Zionism has spread with regard to a Jewish homeland in Palestine, to the point that there are some Muslims who become convinced of those arguments that are presented. What are those arguments? That Palestine is a Jewish homeland and it belongs to the Jews. This is a myth. Some former Muslims, people who leave the fold of Islam, become atheists. They become strong advocates. So they do not only advocate LGBT, they may even advocate Zionism. Because once they lose their Islam, they lose their compass in how to direct themselves in life. They lose their compass in every issue. Because once you do not have the guidance of the Quran and the Sunnah, then a person becomes misguided in everything else. They will advocate for LGBT, they will advocate for Zionism, as if to say atheism goes hand in hand with these persuasions, these philosophical persuasions. So, firstly, as Muslims, where do we stand with regard to the land itself? The claim is that it's a Jewish homeland. Well, the response with regard to that would be like a Muslim today claiming, in fact, even this is not totally similar. But if I said to you, Spain belongs to Muslims because we ruled it for 500 years, Arab Muslims ruled Spain for 500 years, and therefore we should make illegal settler homes in Spain and evacuate the Spanish people from Spain because Muslims did rule it for 500 years, that does not even apply to the Jews today. In terms of what? That current Judaism or Jewish people did not rule Palestine, they did not rule the land. That has, in terms of secular history, that has never been proven. Secondly, what is referred to as anti-Semitism today, the current Jews, the vast majority of them are Ashkenazi Jews. Ashkenazi Jews like Benjamin Netanyahu, are not Semitic people. They are not from that region. Genetically, they do not even belong to that land. The Ashkenazi Jews, they accepted and adopted Judaism as a religion. Racially, they are not Banu Israel. Even many Arabs fall into this mistake, thinking that the current Jews, the majority of them, the Ashkenazi Jews, are Bani Israel. They are not Bani Israel. They are Ashkenazi Jews. They adopted Judaism as a religion when there was an Ashkenazi empire in what is today the region known as the Caucasus. In that region, near the Caspian Sea and the Black Sea, in that region, there was an empire, a Turkic empire. Racially, they are Turkish. And they adopted Judaism because the Muslims, the Khilafah was in the south, and in the north was the Byzantines, the Christians. So they adopted Judaism to strike a balance between Islam and Christianity. After the Ashkenazi Empire was decimated, they migrated to Eastern Europe and Russia. So you had a heavy concentration of Ashkenazi Jews residing in Russia, and a heavy concentration of Ashkenazi Jews residing in Eastern Europe. That is what it became known as the diaspora. These are Ashkenazi Jews. They adopted Judaism. When they were isolated in ghettos in Eastern Europe, they spoke Yiddish, which was a dialect of Hebrew, a language unique to them. And these people are leading the way in what is known as the Zionist philosophy. So the Zionist philosophy claims that Palestine belongs to the Jewish people, that is their homeland, and even though the founder of Zionism, Theodor Herzl, the founder of Zionism, even though he claimed Zionism is actually secular, the basis for Zionism is actually religious. It goes back to the biblical claim to the land. So how can we have a secular world order? The American dollar even has Novus Ordo Seclorum, New World Order, New Secular World Order. How can you have a secular body like the UN, or the claim to being secular? How can you have secular institutions claiming that the return to Jerusalem or the right to a Jewish homeland is actually a secular claim when the basis for this claim is found in the Bible? Or the claim to that homeland is actually from the Bible. Now, what the claim makes is, of course, verses if you go back to the book of Deuteronomy and other books within the Old Testament, within the Jewish, what they refer to as the Torah, you will find the covenant that Allah makes with Ibrahim alayhi salam. And in that covenant, the progeny of Ibrahim alayhi salam, more specifically Ishaq alayhi salam, are promised the land of Canaan. Canaan. What is the land of Canaan? The land of Canaan is modern day Palestine. Canaan. They are promised this land. Later on, in the time of Yusha bin Nun, Bani Israel, they conquered Jerusalem. From that time, we know that later on they lost Jerusalem, and then who reconquered Jerusalem? In the time of Sayyidina Dawood alayhi salam, you had Talut, who led an army to reconquer Jerusalem. That account is related in Surah Al-Baqarah. That account is related in Surah Al-Baqarah. There is an entire story that Talut, he leads an army, and they only number 300 or something, and they are told not to drink from the river. Some of them, if they take a scoop of water from the river, they are forgiven. And then what happens? Dawood alayhi salam, he kills Jalut, Goliath, and they take the land of Palestine to Bani Israel. That's in the Quran, in Al-Quran al-Kareem. After which, Dawood alayhi salam establishes Khilafah in Baytul Maqdis, in Jerusalem. He initially starts the reconstruction of Al-Masjid al-Aqsa, initially. But the construction is increased during the rule of whom? His son, Sayyiduna Sulaiman alayhi salam, and of course, it is completed by the time he passes away. So he passes away, this is from the Quran. He's leaning on what? His staff. And the jinn do not realize he has passed away. A creature eats through the staff, and then the staff snaps. And when the body of Sulaiman alayhi salam falls, the jinn realize that he has passed away, and they also realize they have no knowledge of the ghaib. And they scatter because they are freed from being imprisoned. But the construction of Al-Masjid al-Aqsa is completed. That is regarding that specific structure of Al-Masjid al-Aqsa in that time. But of course we know that Al-Masjid al-Aqsa, the site, was a masjid from the time of Sayyiduna Adam alayhi salam, because the first masjid was the masjid in Makkah al-Mukarramah, al-Masjid al-Haram. Sayyiduna Adam alayhi salam was sent to where? To Sri Lanka. How do we know that? From the hadith in the Mustadrak of Imam al-Hakim, that Sayyiduna Adam alayhi salam, he landed in Sri Lanka. And Ibn Hajar al-Makki rahimahullah, he states because the temperature of Sri Lanka is the closest to paradise. So when he was sent, he travels from Sri Lanka, he reaches Makkah al-Mukarramah, he establishes the first masjid, which is in Makkah al-Mukarramah, the Kaaba, which was rectangular in shape, not square, rectangular. Because the semicircle area known as the Hatim is also the Kaaba. 40 years after, he establishes another masjid on the site of Al-Masjid al-Aqsa, what we have today. That's complex. The black stone that is in Al-Masjid al-Aqsa, which is under dome of the rock, that black stone represents Bawabatu Sama, the doorway to the heavens. That black stone. That masjid then, after time, thousands of years ago, thousands, tens and thousands, only Allah knows the amount of time between Adam alayhi salam all the way up to Sayyiduna Sulaiman alayhi salam, thousands of years. When the time period of Ibrahim alayhi salam is over, then his progeny, which includes Musa alayhi salam, and then the progeny of Bani Israel, they take Jerusalem. So Bani Israel does take Jerusalem, but is this a racial superiority, or is this based upon the deen of Allah? That is what makes the ultimate distinction between Islam and Judaism. Because Islam is what the deen of Allah, meaning an aqidah, a belief. And what happens is that Sayyiduna Sulaiman alayhi salam completes the construction of Al-Masjid al-Aqsa. Now what is Al-Masjid al-Aqsa? Is it just the golden dome? Or is it just the Qibali Masjid, which is the masjid at the front? The response is that it includes the entire complex. The entire grounds were Al-Masjid al-Aqsa. So the construction of Sulaiman alayhi salam is the entire complex. The entire complex is Al-Masjid al-Aqsa. So if you go and pray in Al-Masjid al-Aqsa, wherever you may pray in the compound, you receive the reward of 1,000 prayers. You do not need to enter the buildings. The buildings came about later. I will go into the details of that. But this is to give you you need good knowledge in order to counter the Zionist lobby. Muslims need good knowledge with regard to Palestine, because so many of us have we have misconceptions, or we think that we know something when it's incorrect. So Now what happens, to give you some history of Bani Israel. So when we're discussing Bani Israel, these are the 12 tribes from the children of Yaqub alayhi salam. Who is Yaqub alayhi salam? The son of Ishaq alayhi salam, who is the son of Ibrahim alayhi salam. Yaqub alayhi salam has 12 sons. That story is in which chapter? In Surah Yusuf alayhi salam, chapter number 12 of the Quran. The entire story of Yusuf alayhi salam. Their offspring is known as what? As Bani Israel. So they moved to Egypt. They are enslaved in Egypt. Musa alayhi salam is sent as a Nabi who takes them out of captivity. They travel to where? To the Sinai Peninsula. Where is the Sinai Peninsula? Between the Arabian Peninsula and Egypt, you have a peninsula, a semi-island. That is where the Sinai mountain is. On that Sinai mountain, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reveals Torah, but then later what happens? Because of their disobedience, they worship the golden calf. They are made to roam in the desert for 40 years. Then Sayyiduna Musa alayhi salam and Harun alayhi salam, prior to him, they passed away. Harun alayhi salam is buried on Jabal Uhud in Al-Madinah al-Munawwarah. And then what happens? Musa alayhi salam passes away and he is buried in Jericho. That grave was rediscovered by the Muslims. That is why today's Judaism does not recognize that grave. Then what happens? Yusha bin Nun conquers Palestine, parts of Palestine, because that land is promised to them. This is the claim. So today's Jews are making this claim. And then what happens, or more specifically Zionist Jews, then what happens is that later, as I mentioned, Talut conquers Jerusalem, Dawood alayhi salam becomes the Khalifa and Nabi as the ruler of Jerusalem, and then Sulaiman alayhi salam completes the construction of Al-Masjid al-Aqsa. So we reached that point. Then what happens? Sulaiman alayhi salam passes away. To shorten a long history of that period of time. So what period of time are we looking at? In terms of estimation, we are 1,000 years before Jesus. Estimation, it's not precise. But what happens in that time is that Bani Israel, many of them, they become mushrikeen. They start worshipping idols of the Phoenicians, people from the Levant, people from that area, modern day Lebanon, all these areas. They start worshipping their false gods. When they start worshipping their false gods, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala causes them to be punished. But some of them stay on Tawheed, but the majority of them fall into shirk. At that point, they fall into a split, Bani Israel. 2 tribes, they stay committed to specific teachings, while 10 of the tribes, they form the state of Israel and the state of Judah, 2 states. So the land of Israel divides now. The state of Judah and the state of Israel. So the modern Israel should not even be called Israel, technically, because Israel is a later invention. But this tribe of Judah, they monopolize the religion itself. So the religion becomes known as Judaism. So Judaism is in reference to a religion. This is from our Muslim perspective. Judaism, al-Yahud, is in reference to a religion. Bani Israel is in reference to a race. You see the distinction. So today when people say they are Jewish, Judaism for us as Muslims, it entails a deen, a false deen, made in that period of time, a racial religion. They co-opt other races as well. If someone decides to become a Jew, they will embellish themselves with the Jewish religious insignias, learn Hebrew, but racially they are not Bani Israel. They've adopted Judaism as a religion in that period. And then what happens? A Persian king from Babylon. Where is Babylon? We grew up in Spark Brook. Well, I grew up in Spark Brook in Birmingham. It's an area where you grow up with West Indians. And when we were growing up, they would talk to the police and they would say, Babylon. And we would wonder, what is this Babylon? It's only when you learn Quran you realize, وَمَا أُنزِلَ عَلَى الْمَلَكَيْنِ بِبَابِلَ هَارُوتَ وَمَارُوتَ. Yes? Babylon, why they would refer to the police as Babylon is they were referring to the authorities of Nimrud. That was the concept. Because even the rascals believe in the Bible. But Babylon was the center of what sihr, magic also. So William Peter Blatty, he has a book, The Exorcist. In the beginning he mentions Babylon. Why does he mention Babylon? Because the jinn that possesses the victim comes from that area of Babylon. The king, Nebuchadnezzar, who in we Muslims, I would say, Muslims, our first language is what? Arabic. We say Bukht Nasr. We say what? Bukht Nasr. Yes? Familiarize yourselves with Arabic pronunciation. That our first language is Arabic because it's the language of the Quran. Why do I say that? When you move from India, Pakistan, you move to the UK, your children, their first language is English. Tomorrow when your children decide to move to Spain and live there, their children, their language will be what? Spanish. Language changes. Your race can even change, because if you decide to intermarry with different races, your facial recognition will change. But one thing that never changes is your deen. And your deen must remain the same, irrelevant to where you live. That's why we as Muslims are not nationalists. Because why are you loyal to one nation? You are loyal to Islam. So, and the first language of Islam is Arabic, irrelevant to where you move. So this man, Nebuchadnezzar, he comes into what is modern day Palestine and he sacks the city. Now this causes the Jews, not Jews, Bani Israel, to what they refer to, what is known as the diaspora. What is the diaspora? When Bani Israel was scattered across the world. Some of them relocate, some of them are imprisoned. Those that are in prison, they go back to where? Iraq. In Iraq, you have major Anbiya alayhi salam of him, like Daniel alayhi salam, who preach to Bani Israel while they are in prison or taken as captives. But many of Bani Israel, they are relocated in various parts of the world. Some of them adopt other adyan and they are forgotten. That is where you have the concept of the lost tribes of Israel. The lost tribes of Israel. But those who adopted Judaism as an identity, religious identity, they became known as al-Yahud. Some of them are Bani Israel. So what happens later? When they are free from captivity, Nebuchadnezzar, remember this was around, you can check it, you can fact check, around 500 BC, around that period of time. What happens? They relocate, because the Roman Empire now, remember you have the ascendancy of the Roman Empire. So if you read Roman Empire history, you know that the Romans now reach ascendancy, but the Romans permit the Bani Israel to relocate into Jerusalem again. They come back to Jerusalem. But who rules Jerusalem? The Roman Empire. They even permit them to reconstruct Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa. In that period of time, you have prophets, Anbiya alayhi salam. So this Bani Israel, some of them adopt Islam again, true Islam, at the hands of various Anbiya. Some of them rebel and they kill various Anbiya. Why? Because they've adopted a false religion. What is that false religion? It's known as Judaism, as a deen. It's false because it's racial and it makes concepts which are untrue. It tampers the Torah, it tampers the teachings of Musa alayhi salam. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala continuously sends various Anbiya alayhi salatu wasalam. But we fast forward to where? To the year 0. Why the year 0? A major person, a magnanimous person, Sayyiduna Isa alayhi salam is born. Yes, who is deemed as there's ikhtilaf, who is the second most superior Nabi. Ikhtilaf. Some say Isa alayhi salam, some say that, some say Ibrahim alayhi salam. But whatever the case may be, Sayyiduna Isa alayhi salam is born. What does he preach? Remember, younger people generally is under 40. But I address those people who are under 25. That so many of you are falsely told today that the Quran is a copy of the Bible. Someone who hasn't studied the Bible and who hasn't studied the Quran will believe that. But when you study the Quran or you study the Bible, both of them, you will realize that they are totally distinct. How Isa alayhi salam firstly speaks in the cradle in the Quran. He starts preaching the Injil in the cradle. But in the Bible, in the New Testament, Jesus starts preaching the Bible when he's 33 years old. Not the Bible, the Injil. There is no Bible. Bible is from Biblos. What is Biblos? A compendium of books. Jesus didn't preach the Bible, he preached the Injil. But you'll be shocked how many young Muslims, they are only informed of these things that they begin to believe Christian preachers on YouTube and so many various places. So Isa alayhi salam in the Quran starts preaching to Bani Israel from where? From the cradle. But what does he preach to Bani Israel? Bring them back to the teachings of Sayyiduna Musa alayhi salam, the true teachings of Sayyiduna Musa alayhi salam. So what do? They attempt to crucify him. وَمَا قَتَلُوهُ وَمَا صَلَبُوهُ. The Quran tells us they didn't kill him, they didn't crucify him. But what happened? بَرَفَعَهُ اللَّهُ إِلَيْهِ. Allah raised him. That is known as the ascension. In the New Testament, it is found in the Gospel of Luke. If you go from East Jerusalem, today the Muslims live in large numbers in East Jerusalem. The Mount of Olives is in East Jerusalem. Isa alayhi salam preached in East Jerusalem. The Muslims are there. So if, inshallah, when the Muslims retake Jerusalem and you go there, go to East Jerusalem to the Mount of Olives. That is where Isa alayhi salam preached. But what happened now, the Bani Israel attempted, or elements of the Bani Israel attempted to assassinate Isa alayhi salam or have him killed at the hands of the Romans. And he goes to the Garden of Gethsemane. Before that, he has supper with his apostles. They refer to them as apostles. We would say Sahaba. And what happens? That place, by the way, is preserved by the Muslims. Salahuddin al-Ayyubi rahimahullah, he had a masjid made in the room of the Last Supper, where Isa alayhi salam had his Last Supper. And what happened? It's a masjid, but the Zionists today do not permit Muslims to go there, because underneath is the grave of Dawood alayhi salam, which the Muslims preserved. They've occupied the grave of Dawood alayhi salam in Jerusalem. So what happens? Isa alayhi salam then goes to the Garden of Gethsemane. He prays to Allah and he's raised. When the Roman troops arrive, he's raised. And then events happen. They do not know someone was crucified, but not Isa alayhi salam. That location became known as the Church of the Sepulchre. The Church of the Sepulchre is where the Christians believe Isa alayhi salam was crucified. Now what happened? Josephus, historian, a Jewish historian, but a Roman Jewish, how assimilated to the Romans, not pro-Jews, pro-Romans. He's a historian. He has the history of the antiquities, which they refer to the antiquities of Josephus. In the year 70 Christian era. We use the word Christian era, but Christians use the word AD, Anno Domini, the year of the Lord. In the year 70 CE, Christian era, what happened? That some of the zealots, they rebel against the Roman Empire. When they rebel against the Roman Empire, they sack Jerusalem, they destroy Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa. So you note this history. They destroy Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa. They do not destroy it entirely. What that means, they expel Bani Israel from Jerusalem. So the masjid now, the site remains, the location remains, but the Romans do not permit. Remember, Jerusalem was not a major city. It was a small city. They do not permit Jews to return, and I'm referring to Jews here in terms of Judaism, to return back to where? To Jerusalem. Some of them did it, there is historical evidence to say that some of them remained, but they were not permitted to return back to Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa and to carry out worship in Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa. So they now are scattered again. So previously they were scattered by whom? The Persians. Now they are scattered by the Romans. They are not permitted to reside in Jerusalem. Some of them go and reside where? In Al-Madinah Al-Munawwarah, which at the time is known as Yathrib. These are real Bani Israel, real Semitic people, not false Semitic people like Benjamin Netanyahu, who is Turkic. We check his genetic, you will find he's Turkic, he's not Semitic. So what happens with that Bani Israel? They settle, some of them, many of them settle in Arabia. But you also have converts to Judaism, like Ka'ab al-Ahbar was an Arab who adopted Judaism. So there are many Jews who, if you check them racially, they are not Semitic, they adopted Judaism. They make up the majority of Jews today. But the Bani Israel is scattered everywhere. So what happens now? In that period of time, we fast forward. There's much to say, but we fast forward to the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That when Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam enters Al-Madinah Al-Munawwarah, there is a community of Jews. They are given safety. Now here, there was a pact signed for the safety of all the citizens, if you could use that term, citizens, for the people who resided in Al-Madinah Al-Munawwarah. And Al-Yahud, they become what? They become Ahlul Dhimma, people who are protected by the Muslim governance. But some of them, when they displayed treachery, and this is an important incident for people to know regarding Banu Qurayza, Banu Qaynuqa, Banu Nadir, these were the tribes. They were tribes, Jewish tribes that lived in Al-Madinah. Today's Jews, some of them claim that there was a genocide against Jews by Muslims in that time. Young Muslims need to be informed regarding this. There was no genocide. What happened? They made a pact, but when they displayed treachery when siding with Quraysh, their fortress was surrounded. You know the famous incidents of Khaybar, when Sayyidina Ali radiallahu anhu went to Khaybar. Now, these events are recorded in the Quran, in Surah Al-Hashr and other chapters of the Quran. But what's important to mention, when they were surrounded, you have Sa'ad bin Mu'adh radiallahu anhu, who passed away around that time as well. He was injured. They said, this is important to know, these were Bani Israel and Yahud. They were a combination of both. How can we be a combination of both? Racially they were Bani Israel, religiously they were Yahud. This is when you read the Quran, you should make that distinction. Racial group, Bani Israel. In terms of deen, Yahud. Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam was rahmatul lil alamin. If anyone came to Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam for what? For safety, it was, most of the time it was granted. Overwhelming number of times. These Yahud, instead of saying to Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, we will go with whatever judgment you give, they said we will go with the judgment of Sa'ad bin Mu'adh. And this was their mistake. Well, it's qadarullah, it's not a mistake, but it's a mistake for them. Because what ensued? Sa'ad bin Mu'adh is summoned. He was injured in a battle. He arrives, injured on a mule. When he arrives, he gives the judgment from the Torah. The Torah has harsh judgments, not from our Sharia. What was the judgment from the Torah? That they be taken as captives. This was a specific tribe. The women and children be taken as captives, and the fighting men who can fight, they be killed. That was their judgment on their hands. It was the judgment from the Torah. But if they had accepted the judgment of our Sharia, it would have been merciful, like Salahuddin al-Ayyubi when he demonstrated mercy in Jerusalem. But they didn't accept the judgment of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So that is important for young people to know, that Islam never carried out a genocide, because Jews remained in Darul Khilafah. They remained in the Khilafah even after that. Then some of them were exiled. They remained even after, in the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, they remained in Arabia. But then Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu had them exiled from the Arabian Peninsula. He had them deported. They were permitted to take everything. Where did they relocate? They relocated in Bilad al-Sham. That was real Banu Israel. They were genetically Banu Israel. What happened to them? Some of them remained as Jews. Many of them adopted Islam. Where are those? They became part and parcel of the Palestinian people. So the Arabs you see today are not all Arabs. Some of them have the blood of Bani Israel. They are actual Semitic. Some of them remain Jewish. Those who remain Jewish, they are the Bani Israel that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is addressing in Surah Al-Isra. Today, those Bani Israel, racially they are Bani Israel, and they are Jewish. Sometimes they are referred to as Sephardic Jews. Sephardic Jews. The brown Jews. The better looking ones. They are what? They are Semitic people. They are addressed in Al-Quran al-Kareem. But the Ashkenazi Jews, the Ashkenazi Jews are not Semitic. They adopted Judaism and they resided in Europe. Now we come on to modern history. Of course, I've skipped some parts, but I will mention something. When Sayyidina Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu conquers Jerusalem in his famous conquest, what occurs? Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu goes to the complex of Al-Masjid al-Aqsa. And first he determines the location of the rock. Because you have the dome of the rock, there is a rock. What is the importance of the rock? The rock is firstly the area where Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam had his ascension. Yes? That ascension, that area is known Bawabatul Sama. That rock is also the focal point of the prayers of the people. So Bani Israel, their Qibla was the rock. In Judaism, they refer to it as the Holy of Holies. What does that mean? That they refer to Al-Masjid al-Aqsa as a temple. They say that there was a temple and that rock was the central point. And only the head rabbi was permitted to go into the central point. When they needed to sacrifice, the head rabbi would go on into the rock and he would sacrifice a goat. Not everyone is permitted to enter the rock in Judaism. So what they attempt to do today is to reconstruct a Jewish temple and make that rock the central point. But Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu, he has the rock pinpointed. But then he wants to construct a masjid. But the entire site is too huge. Sulaiman alayhi salam was able to make a masjid so huge. Why? Because he had the support of the jinn construction workers. So that makes sense. The entire site is so big. He was able to build a magnificent masjid. Why? With the help of the jinn. But Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu, he has the Arab hordes, but they are not construction masters. So what does he do? He has a masjid constructed in the front side, which today is known as Qibali. Masjid Qibali. Why is it known as Qibali? Because it faces the Qibla direction. But that doesn't mean that Masjid Aqsa is only the masjid at the front. It's only Qibali or the dome of the rock. The answer is no, it's the entire complex. So when Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu has that constructed, Ka'ab al-Ahbar at that point wanted the masjid constructed behind the rock. What does that tell you? That the area behind the rock is also a masjid. The entire area is a masjid. So what happened? Later, Abdul Malik bin Marwan, one of the unrighteous Khalifas of the Banu Umayyah, most of the Banu Umayyah were unrighteous. Abdul Malik bin Marwan was one of them. But he did a few good things. One of those things was he constructed the golden dome that you have today. The upkeep of that was done by the Mamalik and other kingdoms, the Ottomans also. But the initial construction was done by him, Abdul Malik bin Marwan, in the first 90 years of Islam. First 90 years, that early. Now, then the Muslims, Jerusalem becomes one of the main focal cities because it has many aspects. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, if any of you is able to go there pray, the prayer is equivalent to what? 1,000 rak'ah. Similarly, if you are able to place oil lamps, that recommendation was given. Why Al-Masjid al-Aqsa? Because of the future occupations that will occur. So the masjid had a value in Islam. We do not say the third holy site. You do not say third holy site. What do you say? One of the three holy sites. And the first Qibla. By saying third, it's relegating it to a third division. There's no such thing. Makkah al-Mukarramah is as important as Medina al-Munawwarah, and both of those cities are as important as Al-Masjid al-Aqsa or Bayt al-Maqdis, the entire city. Now, there was a distinction that needs to be mentioned. Makkah al-Mukarramah, the entire city, is al-Haram. Al-Madinah al-Munawwarah was made into a Haram. Jerusalem is not a Haram, but we refer to it as Haram Sharif. In Arabic, they refer to it as Haram Sharif. Why do they say that? Because Sultan Salahuddin al-Ayyubi gave it that name. Why did he give it that name? So any future occupation, people refer to it as Al-Haram al-Sharif, so they know the value of the place. They know the value of the place. Now, Tamim al-Dari radiallahu anhu, he was a Palestinian Sahabi. Palestinian, Arab, from the tribe of Lakhm. Remember, Arabs resided in Palestine from before Islam. And what happened, Tamim al-Dari radiallahu anhu, being the Palestinian companion, it's interesting, he was the only companion to have met which individual? Which one? Ad-Dajjal. It's not by coincidence that a Palestinian Sahabi met Ad-Dajjal, because it entails a Dajjalic occupation of those lands in the future. Zionism is Dajjalism. There's no difference between Zionism and Dajjalism. But this Sahabi radiallahu anhu, Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam wrote a land deed for him. A land deed. It was written on the command of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. What is that land deed? That Palestine belongs to him and his descendants. That land deed can never be violated till Yawm al-Qiyamah. So irrelevant, whoever comes along and they say, this man Abdullah bin Bayya, old man, written a fatwa that for the UAE that recognizing Israel, his fatwa, it's useless. It doesn't carry any weight. Similarly, anyone who supports such type of fatwas. Now we fast forward, we skip the Crusader period because that's a Christian occupation. But the current occupation is a Judeo-Christian occupation. It's a Judeo-Christian occupation. So the Christians, when they initially took Palestine and Al-Masjid al-Aqsa and Bayt al-Maqdis, the entire region, in 1099, that was sanctioned by the Roman Catholic Church. Today the Celtic football team supports Palestine. See how much history has changed. Celtic supports Palestine, they were Catholic. It was a mistake of the Catholic Church. But the current occupation is a Judeo-Christian occupation. Now where does this start from? So I've given you the details with regard to what is known as Judaism today. There is a racial difference and a religious difference. Europe and Russia became hotbeds for anti-Semitism, to the point that you've always had anti-Semitism in these lands. They've despised the Jewish people. While that was going on, it is well documented for the most part of Islamic history, Jews were treated well and as equal in the Muslim world, for the most part. Because for us as Muslims, there is no racial discrimination. We can refute the religion of people, but there is no religious discrimination in the sense that they are not permitted to act upon their deen. They are free to act upon their religion, to the point that in Islam, Jews and Christians are permitted to hold their own courts. So if they are governed by a caliph, they can judge, they can hold their own courts. Today in secular France and secular countries, you are not permitted to hold religious courts. But in Islam, the Jews are given that freedom to judge themselves in accordance with the Torah. That is how much freedom they are given. So, in Islam, we never had this problem of anti-Semitism. We cannot hate someone for their racial origins. We are colorblind racially in Islam. We should be. That meaning in terms of marriage, in terms of diversity, Islam is colorblind. And that is how it should be. In terms of other people's deen, we allow them to act upon their deen, and they are free to act upon their deen. Yes, we refute their adyan. In terms of ideologically, Islam refutes them. But it gives them the freedom to act upon their adyan. Now, that is the dealings with Jews, Christians, all the other faiths throughout Muslim history. And you've had some despot Muslim rulers who did persecute different faiths. That did happen in Islamic history, no doubt. It was never a utopia. But in Christendom, for instance, when Richard the Lioness Heart, they were crowning him in Westminster Abbey, anti-Jewish riots broke out. Why were there these ill feelings towards the Jewish people? Because when the Jews were being persecuted in Europe and Russia, they were stopped from different occupations. And what happened? They were forced into certain occupations like what? Tax collecting. Tax collectors are disliked. You will know that through the HMRC. Yes? Similarly, they were forced into money lending. When they were forced into these occupations, they became disliked. Over time, conspiracy theories developed regarding Jewish bankers. Some Jewish bankers were extremely influential, like the Rothschilds, who had a hand in Zionism as well. But that led to a belief within some of the ruling establishment that the Jewish people wield a control over everything. This was a conspiracy theory. And it led to anti-Semitism, anti-Jewish feelings in Russia and in Europe. In Russia, they carried out pogroms, persecuting Jews, killing them, human rights abuses, all these type of things, totally impermissible in any law. So the Jews became a persecuted minority in many countries. No doubt our sympathy lies with them in this regard. But then what happens, in the 1800s you have Christian Zionism developing, where people like Herbert Spencer, the Lord Shaftesbury, this is a name, you can check these people. These are Christians who forwarded the idea of a Jewish homeland. Why a Jewish homeland? Because they want them exported from Europe to Palestine in order to bring back the return of Jesus. So in the 1800s, in America, in what were known as the colonies before became known as the United States of America, many Christians ran away from persecution. They are strong supporters of a concept of a Jewish homeland. And similarly in Britain, when Britain was in its peak, there were many Christians who supported the idea of a Jewish homeland, but in Palestine. But the problem for them was that Palestine was under Muslim rule, Ottoman Khilafah rule. So then an Austrian journalist known as Theodor Herzl, who was born in 1860, dies in 1904, only 44 years old. He is one of the founders of modern Zionism, and in fact the state of Israel, what will become the state of Israel. He attempts to meet Sultan Abdul Hamid, rahimahullah, in the year 1896. He's unable to do so, but he meets him twice after. He attempts to give him an offer that world Jewry, meaning the Jews, will pay off the public debt, the debt of the Ottoman Caliphate. Remember, the Ottomans accumulated a huge debt. That is why the Ottomans fell. It was a debt that killed them. Ataturk delivered the death blow, but initially they accumulated a huge debt in the early 1800s, which led to the reforms known as the Tanzimat reform. This is why the Ottomans, they started legislating things that went against Islam. But Sultan Abdul Hamid was attempting to reverse that. So Theodor Herzl comes along and he offers millions. He didn't have the millions, by the way. He didn't even have the support of the Jewish people. But he offers millions in gold. Sultan Abdul Hamid refuses. Later, Sultan Abdul Hamid, he writes a letter to his Shaykh, Shaykh Abu Shamat, who was from Damascus. He was a Shadili Shaykh from Damascus. He writes a letter to him regarding the Zionist attempt to purchase the land of Palestine. Now what happens, Theodor Herzl he doesn't have worldwide support. In fact, there were British Jews who had disdain for the concept of Zionism. But there were also British Jews who supported Zionism. One of the prominent British Jews who supported Zionism was, of course, the Lord Rothschild of that time. There are different Lord Rothschilds of every era. The Lord Rothschild of that, Lionel Rothschild, meaning an avid supporter of Zionism, who in fact even purchased Palestinian land in the late 1800s. Why did they purchase all that land? So then they can make settlements for a future Israeli government. And then what happens, they attempt, in that time, there were other leaders of Zionism in that period of time. They attempted to convince the British cabinet. So the problem with democracy, which is a popular tyranny, a populist tyranny or populist absolutism, that is what democracy is. Whoever is the majority becomes the tyrant. That is what democracy is. It's a scam. If you're the majority, you can tyrannize the rest. But what happens is that cabinets change every so often, and different cabinets will have different policies. So the policies of Asrar, who was the prime minister up to 1916, he didn't want to know anything with regard to Zionism. So when Herbert, one of the cabinet ministers, he wrote Herbert Spencer, Jewish man, Jewish Zionist, when he writes to Asrar that they should take Palestine and make it a Jewish homeland. Asrar, who was the Prime Minister of England up to 1916, he rejects it. But then the next cabinet comes in, the cabinet of whom? David Lloyd George. Now David Lloyd George is a Zionist. So when General Allenby marches into Jerusalem in 1917, November 1917, and in his diaries he says, I will retake Jerusalem for Christmas time. He enters Jerusalem. Arthur Balfour writes what? The declaration, the Balfour Declaration, declaring a Jewish homeland in Jerusalem, prematurely. Even though the same Arthur Balfour in 1905, he had the Aliens Act here in the UK, Aliens Act. That was to curb immigration. They couldn't curb people from Nepal, but they curbed off many Jews. Yes, it was a racist law. Why was it racist? To stop Jewish immigration. We would say to the Jewish people, when the Khilafah is re-established, you are welcome to live in the Khilafah as in a peaceful place. That is our message to the Jewish people. We have nothing against Jews. They can live peacefully with Muslims, side by side with Arabs. But currently it's the misguided Zionist philosophy that has misguided so many Jewish people and non-Jews alike. So what happens? They increase the number of Jewish immigrants, but worldwide Jewish sentiments were still not with Zionism, even at that point. This is when they start having the concept of kibbutz. What is the kibbutz? You know, the settlements, making settlements, purchasing land, making them farming land. Making that into farming land, later it will become known as the State of Israel. And also, people like David Ben-Gurion, the first president of Israel at the time, later, he was an early migrant to Palestine. They started formulating a group known later as what? The IDF, Israeli Defense Force. How arming the Jewish population against the Arabs, arming themselves against the Arabs who were the majority people who lived in that land. So the claim they make, they say there was no Palestine. This is one of the claims the Zionists make. There was no Palestine. That's like saying to me, there was no Pakistan or Bangladesh. Does that mean that the population of Pakistan and Bangladesh was absent? Pakistan came about in 1947, but the population was still in that land. Similarly, the Palestinians were living in that land. An important thing to note, were the Palestinians traitors to the Ottoman Caliphate? The answer is no. So while many Arabs were traitors, in fact, when they count those who were treacherous to the Ottomans, proportionately they did not make up the majority of the Arabs. They were a small number. They were led by Hussein bin Sharif, the Sharif of Mecca. Hussein bin Sharif, he had deals with the British. His son Faisal who worked with whom? With T. Lawrence of Arabia. Together they attacked the port of Aqaba, and then they entered with the British troops into Damascus. They entered Damascus. He was promised to be the king of Greater Syria, of all of Syria. Later the French removed him. Now this Sharif, his descendants today are the royal Jordanian family. So treachery is in their timeline. They are, in my belief, what Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam referred to in the hadith in the Sunan of Abu Dawud, that a tribulation will start from a man who claims to be from my lineage. This was that tribulation. This is that tribulation. While the Palestinians, David Lloyd George says we were unable to consult the Palestinians because most of the Palestinians were pro-Ottoman. The Muslim Palestinians, they were pro-Ottoman. Unlike people in Lebanon, unlike certain people in Damascus, unlike people in other parts of the Arab world, they were pro-Ottoman Khilafah. So this flag that we have, the Sykes-Picot flag, the current flag that we have, this flag, the Palestinian flag, which Braveman, is that her name? The Home Secretary, Braveman. She attempting, Brave what? Braverman. I'll refer to as Braveman. Yeah? Braverman attempts to illegalize an absurd policy which is very un-British. It sounds more Indian to me, to ban a flag. This flag was what was made by the Sykes-Picot Agreement. Who is Sykes? Sykes is Mark Sykes. Mark Sykes was the British minister who, along with Picot, the French minister, they formulated the Palestinian flag. So for Braverman to attempt to illegalize a flag which was formulated by the British themselves is absurd. It's a Zionist policy. It's not a British policy. There's nothing British in its essence. So that flag was made at that time. So then you have the formulation of the State of Israel, the formal formulation of Israel in 1948, May 1948, where the UN then gives 55% of Palestine to the current occupation. So the UN is not a body for us to trust. You can veto as much as you want, you can campaign as much as you want. These campaigners, they think we can change the system from within. It's absurd. The UN is such a body that the US can veto so many things alone, the US. Then 5 world governments can veto the entire United Nations. How is that even a democratic representation of the world? So the UN gave 55%. But remember, from 1917 to 1948, Palestine was under British mandate. Now, when it was under British mandate, Zionists carried out terrorist attacks against the British Army. So the King David Hotel, you check the King David Hotel bombing. The King David Hotel was bombed. British soldiers were killed by Zionists. Rishi Sunak needs to read a book or two. He needs to read a bit of British history. That Zionists in history attacked the British who were stationed in Palestine. That is something that needs to be pointed out. Modern Israel was constructed on the blood of British soldiers. In the period from 1917 to 1948, my grandfather was a part of the British Army. You can find him online. Ali Shan, forgotten soldier. He was a part, and many of you here, let's have a show of hands. How many of your grandfathers are part of the British Army? Watch. See how many hands are, especially people from Azad Kashmir. Yes? Many of our ancestors were a part of that British Army. So their legs were blown off by Zionist terrorists, something which Rishi Sunak needs to know. These are the kind of counter arguments you must present to them. So then in 1948, they established the formal establishment of the State of Israel. Then we go on to the modern times, post 1948. From 1948 to 2023 is all history. Meaning, from a young age, we've all been observing what, from the Palestinian Intifada in the 1980s, all the way from the failed Oslo Accords, where Yasser Arafat gives a weak politician who sold off much of Palestine, a weak politician. And then you have Gaza being turned into a concentration camp, a modern concentration camp. And then you have the recent attacks. All of this is modern history. But what do we have to say with regard to the current attack? Some people think it's a conspiracy. They think whenever they see a militant Muslim group carrying out an attack on power structures, they think this can only happen because the power structure permitted it to happen. As if to say an attack can only happen when the power permits it. Unfortunately, they have a weak understanding of government power. Governments are weak and ineffectual. Governments are insecure. No government is all powerful. No government watches everything you do. These are myths, fabrications that are what propagated by Hollywood movies. For you to think they have cutting edge technology that they even see a fly, household fly, crossing the border. This is false. If that were the case, Britain, I believe Britain, our GCHQ, has one of the best intelligence in the world. Yes. Yet we have illegal immigration all the time. Illegal immigrants are always crossing our borders. Yes. So if GCHQ can have failures, what is Mossad in comparison to British intelligence? Mossad is not all-seeing and all-knowing. What it demonstrates is that these power structures are in fact weak, militarily weak. Benjamin Netanyahu is insecure. If he wasn't so insecure, why would his policies in Gaza be so violent? A ruler who has his head screwed on, which very hard to find today, very hard to find, a sane ruler, he would be measured in his response. If he is so powerful, he would be very measured. He would be responsible. Yet an insecure ruler like Benjamin Netanyahu or Modi, they are insecure to the point that they become violent beyond the boundaries. This is because your state is now, the myth of an invincible Israeli army has been broken. From 1967, when they defeated conventional Arabist socialist armies, or in 1973, the myth, they pervade a myth of an Israeli invincible army. That myth has been broken. So where do we stand today, meaning we people here? What we should demand is an opening of the borders. Why an opening of the borders? Firstly, so food and water reaches the people of Gaza. That is our first demand. Borders must be open. Secondly, the Jordanian border must be opened. Why? So the Palestinians in Jordan can return home. Because in 1948, over 800,000 Arabs were evicted or fled Palestine and entered Jordan. They should be allowed to return home. When the Jordanian border is opened, that is a game changer in the current geopolitics in that region. So we as Muslims should demand that the borders be open. This is our care and concern. This is what we can do practically. No Muslim alim tells young people from here to go abroad and fight. Why? Because firstly, you will be a burden for those people. Secondly, it's illegal. It's illegal. You will be facing arrest. The counter-terrorism unit will be having a field day because they will become relevant all of a sudden. Yes? So no Muslim provokes young people to go up, meaning the prominent Muslim cleric will say to you to go abroad. No, why? Because it's endangering yourself. What are the practical things? I said demand that the borders be open. Use all your spheres of influence. Yes, some young people, they become what? They become frustrated. Why should you not be frustrated? The answer is that every child or every person that dies is a shaheed for us. Is a shaheed. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has written for certain people to be shaheed, and He takes them as shuhada. This is why we should not be frustrated. I do not watch the footage in Gaza where children are suffering. I do not watch it, because it naturally will enrage you. But when you come to a calm mind, you realize by you going there, you endanger yourself and you endanger the people there, because you are not militarily trained. It should be the task of the Pakistani army, because they are all these years, Pakistan has perpetuated myths. They made so many myths. Pakistani army is so great. They have the Khalid bin Walid tank. They have Gori missile. They send officers to Israel and they defeat Israel. They don't tell you that General Zia al-Haq killed Palestinians. And now they kill Pakistanis. I'm not with any political party, but they kill supporters of Imran Khan. They kill people of Tahrik al-Labbaik. Yes, Pakistani army is doing this. And now this happens, the Pakistani army is quiet. So where's the powerful Pakistani army? They cannot even deal with the cow urine drinker Modi, and they make all these myths about the Pakistani army. But it's far than them. It's far than the Turkish military. Erdogan was only making a gas pipe deal a few weeks ago with Israel. Last year they were doing training exercises together, Israel and Turkey. It's far than them people. But you young Muslims, what is your fard? Your fard is praying your Fajr Salah in the masjid. Your fard is to firstly, a Sahabi went to the Prophet ﷺ and he said, Ya Rasulullah, am I permitted to go jihad, or shall I look after my parents? And Rasulullah ﷺ said, your jihad is with your parents. What does that mean? That there are resistance fighters over there fighting. The young person running away from his responsibilities is in reality running away from when he has to deal with his father shouting at him every day. The jihad is with the parents. The jihad is in praying your salah 5 times a day, avoiding haram, talabul ilm, establishing the deen of Allah. Is this a cowardice advice from someone like me? The answer is no, because there is no one more vocal. When there are some, but not many, who are as vocal regarding this issue as me. It's not me giving you cowardly advice, it's telling you a reality check. But at the same time, political action is essential. What political action? We will politicize ourselves as Muslims in terms of making pressure groups. If the Zionists have AIPAC in America, we Muslims residing in the West must make an anti-Zionist lobby. Yes, these type of things should be done. Do not underestimate that action. Do not underestimate you becoming a journalist. So many of you have potential to become journalists, to give the Muslim counter-narrative. So many of you have the potential to enter media. So many of you have potential to enter various fields to counter the Zionist lobby in the Western Hemisphere. But similarly, those who have influence at a bigger level, then they should exercise their influence in changing the state of affairs. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us fath in al-Quds al-Sharif, victory in al-Quds al-Sharif at the hands of the righteous. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم وأتوب إليه.